Well, hey guys, it's Mr. Gallion. We're going to talk today about globalization, which is standard 8.5b. This is kind of a major idea because since the end of World War II, we've seen this trend toward more and more interaction between countries. And lately, there's actually a lot of question about, is that a good idea, right? Do we want to be super dependent on China to make ventilators for the coronavirus when they might end up just hoarding them for themselves? Or what about medicine? If we have some worldwide pandemic like we're in right now, do they share that with us, or do they take care of their own people first? Or do we take care of our own people first if we come up with a vaccine first? Lots of questions about this. So let's dive in and let's take a look. I'm going to go quick because there's a lot here. So don't hesitate. If you have any questions, make sure you ask me about them. Let's go. So globalization, if we're going to define it, is just the trend of expanding and integrating our worldwide trading networks. In other words, more and more and more, we have American companies that are here in the United States, BMW for, not American companies, a German company here in the United States like BMW or Michelin. We're getting stuff imported from around the world. Sony, Kawasaki, Yamaha, all those are international companies. You've also got examples like Starbucks. When I go to Starbucks to get a cup of coffee, the coffee beans may be sourced from anywhere around the world. That's what these green arrows are. The red arrows show you where the paper comes from. That's like Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Canada. And the sugar could come from South America, or it could come from, it looks like that's Australia. Over on the other side, we've got McDonald's, and those dots represent how many McDonald's are in each country. And the bigger the dots, the more McDonald's. You can see it's just massive, and I can attest to that. When I was in the Philippines and I really wanted to taste at home, I could go to McDonald's because the not meat they had there was the same as the not meat we have here. And I like McDonald's, so it's okay. So we've seen this trend of globalization really since World War II, and a lot of it comes because countries wanted to grow to compete with us. After World War II, there's no question we're the undisputed largest economy in the world, fastest growing economy in the world, and other countries are like, ooh, let's come up with a way that we can be more like them. So they become more and more, I guess, dependable is one way to put it. They can output large numbers of stuff. You see lots of different options that are put together to make this happen. So you've got the European Union in the 1990s. They look at the United States and are like, whoa, you guys have 50 different states who come together for one economic and political purpose. So why don't we do the same? Let's come together. You see these green countries here in the 90s decide we're going to work together. We're going to cooperate politically. We're going to try to all be democratic. We're going to encourage trade between us. We're going to promote the development of these countries. They don't become one big massive country. It's not like they don't become the United States like that or like the United States in that way. But they're going to work together in a very similar fashion. They decide they even need a common currency, which is where they get the euro. Now, we, in response to that, say, okay, great. What if we expand our network even a little further than just the 50 states? So we create this thing called NAFTA, which stands for the North American Free Trade Agreement. That is an agreement between us and Mexico and Canada that says, let's not have as many tariffs between us. So if something's made in Mexico and imported in the United States, let's not put a big tariff on it. Okay, and in return, Mexico won't put a big tariff on our goods and our products. Okay, and same thing with Canada. Now, this is great, but it also has some negative impacts. I remember in my small hometown, we had a company called Pioneer Balloon that made, get this, balloons. And when NAFTA was passed, they said, cool, we can actually make things more cheaply and inexpensively in Mexico. So they shut down the plant in my town. A lot of people lost their jobs. It moved across the border to Mexico and they set it up, but they hadn't done the science right. They didn't realize that the temperature, the climate in Mexico was too warm for the latex in the balloons to, I don't know, congeal correctly or whatever. So it didn't actually work out all that well. So the company ended up shutting down entirely. But you can see why it was tempting for them to move across the border, get cheap labor, and then they could ship the balloons back here with no tariff. So it'd be great. So even today, NAFTA is a little bit controversial, and it's been discussed a couple times of late what we should do with it. You see this trend continue. There's a thing called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT, which basically just says, hey, let's lower tariffs all around the world so there's even more trade. Okay, let's and this might seem a little crazy, especially when we're dealing with the question of what do we do with medicine and ventilators and that kind of a thing if we're short on them. And the answer and the response to this is, well, we need to be, at the time, we're just saying, look, it makes sense for every country to make the thing that they're the best at and then ship it somewhere else. Because if we produce something super cheap and then we ship it to China, then China can actually buy that thing cheaper than if they made it there and they weren't as efficient at it, and vice versa. If China makes something really cheap and they ship it to us, we can buy it much cheaper than if we made it ourselves. That's the idea. Let's get everything inexpensively. We have more money for growth and other things. Now, all this means that there's more competition with American industry, okay? So all of a sudden, China gets really good at making things in China. And so all of a sudden, we have this thing called an unfavorable balance of trade, which means we're exporting. Sorry, let's try that again. We're importing more than we export. Well, that's not entirely great because it means that we're losing some American jobs, right? Because they're outsourced to China or Vietnam or Thailand or India. And that can cause a bit of an issue, okay? So here's the idea, unfavorable balance. Dollars are going out. Here are the dollars coming in. That's the idea of an unfavorable balance of trade. So we've had to kind of shift a little bit from the manufacturing industry, which, I mean, even when I grew up, a lot of people said, man, I'm going to graduate from high school. I'm not going to go to college. I'm just going to get a job at the Midwest plant. They made like engines for lawnmowers, that kind of thing. Or I'm going to go work at Pepperidge Farm. That was a company in my hometown, right? I'm going to go make cookies. That's great, but the problem is if those jobs suddenly dry up, you've got to have another skill. And so we start pushing people more toward the service industry. Let me do something for you. Let me, and this could be small stuff, not small stuff, I don't want to call it small, but relatively easy things which aren't all that easy, like yard care, or let me go fix your lawnmower, or let's do landscape. I don't know why all my examples have to do with the yard. I guess I need to do the yard today. But it could also be, we're going to be an accountant, doctor, lawyer, teacher, those kind of things. Okay. And those jobs become much more in demand. We're also going to start to see changes in communication around the world. Okay. The cell phones that we have now, that's an old iPhone now, isn't it? Ooh. But the cell phones that we have, the internet, the way that we're connected to the rest of the world in very brand new and surprising ways, at least surprising even a decade ago, have started to bring some challenges. I mean, think about the privacy questions that we have. Think about, I mean, some of the apps that you have, like TikTok, right? People talk about TikTok is owned by a Chinese firm that maybe is reporting to the Chinese government, right? I probably should know more about that, but there's no question it's owned by China, and there's some concern about, you know, spying and that kind of a thing. Well, that wasn't an issue when I was in high school. I wasn't worried about China getting onto my rotary phone and, you know, spying on me. So we have some questions and concerns. So privacy laws, we got to pass these things. What do we do if, you know, with the webcam on your computer, like I'm using right here, are there laws about who can and can't access that and when they can't? I mean, you've given people access to your camera if you've got TikTok or any other number of things. When can they use it? When can they not use it? We've had to grow our communications networks, and that's the thing we've got to protect. Like even in the middle of the coronavirus, when it first came out, people were using so much Netflix in Europe that Netflix had to slow down their bandwidth so that they wouldn't have a backup problem with the internet in Europe. So all kinds of interesting problems that we hadn't really considered up until this. Also, because of the internet, it's way easier to outsource jobs. So now it's at the point where I know if I call my phone company, I'm going to get connected to a call center in the Philippines. Like, just, I will. Okay? If I call my credit card company, it's either the Philippines or India because it's super easy and those people are willing to work at a relatively low cost. At the same time, we've got some competition for domestic jobs, okay, at least to some degree. So we've got a number of immigrants, both legal and illegal. In this case, I think we're largely talking about illegal, although legal to some degree. We'll talk about that in a minute. Illegal immigrants are willing to come in and do jobs that you and I don't want to work, including farm jobs. It's at the point where if the only jobs that we had were farm jobs, I think a lot of Americans would be like, no, I don't want to do it. That's hard work. It's dirty work. It's not great work. So it's not just that there's competition. It's that people are just, I mean, people are like, I don't even want to do that anymore. So what happens if there is a labor shortage in the food industry in the middle of the coronavirus, for example? What if there's a shortage and we don't have enough immigrants coming into the country, legally or illegally for that matter, to keep that going? There's something like 60% of the people who grow or who pick food in the United States are illegal. So Interesting questions, right? I'm not saying I have answers. I'm just saying interesting stuff. So this immigration debate and how we handle illegal immigrants, in addition to how many legal immigrants do we let in, is going to impact the country. Because if we let in lots of legal immigrants, who are they going to vote for? Are they going to be more likely to be Democrat? Are they going to be more likely to be Republican? Are they going to, I mean, see, you can see why the immigration issue is so big, because often Democrats are saying, well, let's make it a little easier to let people in. Well, if I'm a legal immigrant and I'm saying, well, you're going to make it easier to let my family in, maybe I'm going to vote Democrat, right? So hot button issue for sure. All this has made unions feel kind of threatened. We're losing jobs. We have competition from overseas. We have immigrants coming in to take some jobs in some cases. I will say this, you don't see illegal immigrants typically going and working in car factories, that kind of a thing, which is why it's not on this list, but it's an issue. There's more mechanization of jobs. In other words, we have robots that do stuff. The political climate has not been super friendly over the last couple decades to unions. And there's also this issue here where, so unions' job is to protect the people who belong to the union, get them more money. So what happens if I work in a car factory and I'm a member of a union and they keep saying, let's increase the amount of money that the people get paid. And so now I'm getting paid $30 an hour because of the union. I'm like, man, I love the union. That's so good. Then the car company realizes they can build a plant in China and they pay people $5 an hour. Okay, did my union help me or did it hurt me? I mean, it helped me short term. I got $30 an hour for a while, but then maybe my job is going to disappear over to China because I'm way overpaid. Well, not overpaid even, but just compared to other people around the world. So we start to see this thing as this transition happens called the Rust Belt. Up in the northern part of the country where a lot of the industry happened, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Michigan, lots of jobs are starting to disappear and move overseas. And so now we call this area the Rust Belt because the factories are still there. They're just not being used. And so you find these old rusted out factories. I remember well seeing those when I was growing up. Okay. There are some parts of the country that have grown since the 1960s in industry. We call this the Sun Belt. A lot of these southern states were able to attract people to them because, number one, they weren't as friendly to unions. Like South Carolina doesn't require you to be a member of a union to work in various industries, including education. And because of that, well, they're, I won't even get into that. That's a whole other thing. But a lot of industries say, well, let's go down there. In addition, why after the 1960s? Why not before that? Well, it was really stinking hot. And as we make air conditioning more widespread, or ubiquitous, if you want a good word, people start to say, ooh, we can air condition our factories. Let's move down there. It'll be much more comfortable. So we call this area the Sun Belt. The industry has grown down here, and so is the population because that's where the jobs have been. Excuse me. In 2008 and 2009, when the recession happened, a lot of people moved from the north to the south because we had a lot of jobs, a lot of factories that were growing, and it caused some of those dying industries up north to die even faster. So maybe that'll be the case here. Maybe we'll recover quickly because we have a lot of industry. I hope that's the case. We've had a lot of industries and retirees move down here because it's comfortable, and with air conditioning, it's even more comfortable. This is what I mentioned a second ago. A lot of Sunbelt states have what they call right-to-work laws. You don't have to be a union to work in a particular job. I'll give you an example. My mom was a teacher for years and years up in Ohio. She did not like unions, but she was a member of the union because the way it worked up there was you had two choices. You could pay like $500 a year to be a member of a union. I'm not sure it's $500. I'm making up that number because I don't know. Forgive me. Or you could pay, let's say, $450 to not be a member of the union because they said, even though you're not a member, you still get the benefits of the union's negotiation and work on your behalf. So for $50 extra, she could actually vote on and get some additional benefits from the union. So that's because of the laws they had. In South Carolina, we don't have that. As a result, there really is no teachers union. So there's not a group of teachers that has a lot of say in policy, other than just the threat of, I guess, walking out of the school. But then, our jobs would be at risk. So who knows? And I'm talking, to be clear, at the state level. I'm not talking about within the school. Okay. Now, this has weakened unions because you move down south and it's not there. They don't have a lot of say. So, why does all this matter? It matters because you now are going to have to compete with jobs with people from around the globe. It's one of the reasons that the Republican Congress under George W. Bush passed the No Child Left Behind Act, which says we're going to make states test students to make sure that their teachers are actually getting them a good education. That's one of the reasons that in your lifetime you've seen lots and lots of tests, because the government wants to make sure that we are doing a good job in getting you information. Now, that's super debated. If everybody in every state has to do exactly the same thing, is that right? What if one state was way ahead to begin with, but now we got to refocus on this other stuff? Lots of questions surround No Child Left Behind. Now, some other economic impacts. Because of all this competition, because of this push to grow the economy, and because all these jobs are out there, a lot of times both parents are working. Sometimes that's because they choose to bring in more money. Sometimes it's because they have to, because it gets expensive to live in America. So if mom and dad are both away at work, or maybe you only have one parent at home, you got to figure out what to do with kids. So demand for daycare is going up. Fast food is going up because, like, how often before the coronavirus would your parents be driving home and they'd just be like, man, I don't feel like cooking tonight, so I'm going to get some fast food. Well, that also has led to a demand in healthcare, like heart disease, cholesterol. All these things are, going through the roof, and that's a direct result of the way that we've chosen to live, right? And so maybe you guys saw Super Size Me back in the day. If not, it's pretty good. A guy eats nothing but McDonald's for a month, and he gets really sick as a result. Okay. Now there's good news medically. Medical advances have made our lives longer. This lady here, I think that's a lady. This lady over here, she's, maybe back in the 1920s, 1930s, would she be healthy enough still to ride her bike? Maybe, maybe not. But now we can do hip replacements. Now we can put you on medicine if your blood pressure is too high. There are all kinds of things we can do. But as you get older, that aging population needs more medical care. And so health costs have gone up and insurance costs have gone up. Okay. If you have the way that health insurance works, I'm just going to talk about this for a second, is everybody who has health insurance pays into a big pot. And if I get sick, health insurance takes money out of the pot to pay for a good chunk of my bills. Now, the problem is if you have more people getting sick, you've got to take more money out of the pot. What happens when the pot is empty? Well, now the health insurance company is out of business. So what does insurance have to do if you have more old people who are likely to get sick or more young sick people? Well, you've got to increase your fees, which is why insurance costs go up, because you've got to have money in that pot or you can't take care of health costs. Now, this is, the standards were written before all the Obamacare stuff was finalized, and so I know they're a little bit old. So because this is done with the EOC in mind, I'm going to take it from that perspective. I'll also tell you a little bit about what's changed. Especially in the recession of 2008, a lot of Americans lost their jobs that had health insurance. Some companies said we have to come up with a way to save money, and so they dropped health benefits. So people weren't able to get their health insurance through their work. That's one of the things that Obamacare actually changed, is that if you work more than a certain number of hours, your company has to give you health care. Now that can be bad because sometimes what they do is they like to keep you right below that number that forces them to give you health insurance, which means maybe you don't get the hours that you wanted and you don't have health insurance. So that's an interesting problem. Clinton tried to deal with that, and this is before Obama, I know, but Clinton tries to deal with that in the 90s. So he works to get a healthcare reform bill passed. And basically he says what we ought to do is have the government act as the one single healthcare insurance company in the country. That way they can negotiate how much costs ought to be for an MRI or for cancer surgery or for brain surgery or for dealing with a heart attack or to go to the ER. As it is right now, if we have 20 different health insurance companies, there might be 20 different prices that are going to be paid for those things. Okay. So anyway, so we can talk more about that if you need me to, but Republicans don't like that. Republicans really oppose this and they defeat it under Clinton. Now, why is that? Remember, It's not that Republicans want everybody to die. Okay? It's because Republicans don't like the idea of big government. They think that government doesn't do things efficiently and well. And so as a result, they're like, why would we trust the government with our health care? Okay, that's their primary thinking. There are other nuances there, but that's kind of the big concept. So when Obama becomes president in 2008, he says, let's bring this back. And he works with a Democrat controlled Congress to get a health care bill passed. It's still controversial. And even now, in the middle of 2020, Trump is still talking, in the middle of a pandemic even, Trump is still talking about how do we get rid of Obamacare. What does Obamacare do? Okay, this is for free. Obamacare does a couple things. Obamacare says, number one, your healthcare provider or your healthcare has to come from your work if you work more than a certain number of hours. The second thing Obamacare does is it says you can stay on your parents' insurance until you're 26. So if you're looking for a job, if you're in college or whatever, you don't have to worry about losing your health insurance. It also says that medical insurance companies can't deny you because you have a pre-existing condition. So for example, I have asthma. If I didn't have insurance and I went to get insurance, some of them might say, well, you're more at risk for other problems, so we're not going to give you insurance at all, okay? Even more so and more likely if it was cancer that I had before, if it was heart disease that I had, if it were, any number of things. Well, the problem is if I don't have health insurance and then I get sick, all that's going to have to come out of pocket. And so Obamacare says you can't deny someone on the basis of that. Here's the problem. So now we've got this big pot of money and we're letting more and more sick people into the deal. Sick people are more likely to get sick again. And so in order to pay for their treatments, we had to ask everybody to pay a little bit more so the pot can grow so we can be in good shape. That's why it's controversial, at least a big part of why it's controversial, because it increased people's healthcare costs as a result. Now, is that good? Well, it depends on your point of view. It depends on what's more important to you, how much money you have in your wallet, or you or other people having access to health insurance. It's debatable, okay? One last issue is that as people get older, there's another problem, that is Social Security. I think we've talked about this in the past, but the idea is we have more people at retirement age than we have who are working, largely because of the baby, but well, that's not, yeah, I think that's true. We have more people at retirement age or above, so basically say 60 to however old. And that's a real problem, especially as the baby boomers have gotten older. It's really hard to take care of their retirement since we're pulling more money out of the Social Security system than we're putting into it. So what are we going to do? Okay. There are all kinds of arguments over the deficit, over the debt. What are we going to do? How are we going to handle it? And you get to look forward to those in your lifetime. And I think that's the last slide. Okay. Y'all, I really appreciate you sticking with it. Let me know if you have any questions about this particular section, and I will